Gun episode number 85. It's the one we've all been waiting for. It's the Backyard Brawl preview here on ITG. I am Wesley Uhler. This is In the Gun, your new favorite WVU football podcast. I got the best teammates in the business, the signal caller Jed Drenning and the runaway beer truck himself, Mr. Owen Schmitt, in this episode of ITG. As always, brought to you in part by our friends at BetOnline, your number one source for all of your betting needs. You can get the latest odds, lines, matchup reports, and more for baseball, football, boxing, golf, you name it. BetOnline continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live bets and all your favorite casino and card games available to play right on your phone. So head to their website or use your mobile device to sign up today to get in on the action. And make sure you use the promo code BELIEVE when you sign up for 50% off your, or 50% welcome bonus, on your first deposit. That's BLEAV at BetOnline, where the game starts. Gentlemen, as always, headlines to get us started. And this is the headline. It's Backyard Brawl Week. We don't need to talk about anything else, baby. There's Pitt on the horizon, Saturday night, 7:30 at Mountaineer Field at Milan Puskar Stadium. You don't want us to talk about anything else going on in college football. You don't want us to talk about anything else going on in the Big 12. You just want to hear how the Mountaineers are going to beat Pitt. And Jed, I'll start with you here. Weird week for the Pitt Panthers, right? They lose at home in an ugly game against Cincinnati, the first time they had played Cincinnati in a long time, restoring one of their old rivalries there, the River City rivalry, as Pitt and Cincinnati fans have come to call it. Cincinnati jumps up to a huge lead. Pitt claws back in it, gets a chance at the end, but is unable. Their quarterback, Phil Jerkovich, goes 10 of 32. The big-time recruit transfer who's from Pittsburgh, started at Notre Dame, went to Boston College, now finishing out as a super senior back at in his hometown in Pittsburgh there. Well, he goes 10 for 32 and gets booed by Pitt fans in the process, and then goes to his post-game press conference and proceeds to say, if you're a grown man at our game booing us, that's pretty pathetic if you ask me. Pat Narduzzi kind of doubles down on that, right, and says it's just a bunch of losers tweeting from their basement. We don't care what they have to say. It's been a tumultuous week for the Pitt football program after, I think, a lot of hope and a lot of optimism coming into the season. Are we kind of getting these guys where we want them, Jed, or might this work the other way and this will galvanize that locker room?
It's hard to say, right? You make some valid points, but let's start with Jerkovich. I think he's as advertised, an NFL body type. He has the kind of skill set that, very highly recruited kid from what was it, Pine Richland?
Pine Richland, yep.
Yeah, and so spent a couple years at Notre Dame as a 4-star, eventually transferred to Boston College, playing for offensive coordinator, Cignetti when he was at Boston College. It's one of the reasons he transferred to Pitt. But let's start with this. Even when you played for a guy previously and you speak the language, it's difficult to parachute into a roster in the offseason. We saw this with JT. Now, JT arrived later in the summer, but even after playing for Graham, he had a very disjointed and rough camp. I mean, we had concerns going into the Pitt game in the opener. So it's not a seamless transition, or not as seamless as you might think, even if you played for your play caller. But Jerkovich is part of what you saw against Cincinnati was on him. Part of it was on, Pitt's offense at large, and part was Cincinnati's pretty nasty at the point of attack defensively. But I think he's as advertised. Let's talk about what he meant to Boston College. I mean, he was in a very bad offensive ecosystem at Boston College. He really was. I mean, that offense last year, they had him and they had Zay Flowers, first-round receiver that went to the Ravens, okay? They were dead last in the entire ACC in total offense. They were dead last in the entire ACC in rushing offense. Guys, here's a number for you. Boston College last year averaged 2.1 yards per carry in the run game. That's the offense that he was trying to direct. All they had was the pass game. Now he's gone, and this will give you some sense of what he meant to those guys at Boston College. Now they're dead last in the ACC in passing offense with him and Flowers gone. So he comes to Pitt. He tries to settle in. It's an offense somewhat in transition. I mean, first of all, they had to replace a couple starters up front. But more so than anything, the security blanket of last year's Pitt offense was Izzy Abacanada, right? I mean, this is a kid who ran for 1,400 yards, 20 touchdowns, led the country in touchdown rushes. He's gone. So now they have to find a way to reinvent and restart their run game, in addition to breaking in a new quarterback who's trying to develop some sense of timing with his wide outs and in the perimeter game. And meanwhile, this Cignetti offense is heavily predicated on downfield concepts. It's not a West Coast system, which you have this quick game that's an extension of the run game. It's not that tried and true West Coast system. It's more you're pushing the football vertically, and that means pass protection has to hold up because the route development takes a while. So when I watched the tape against Cincinnati, and for that matter, even against Duquesne, some of it was him holding the ball too long. Some of it was protection breaking down because, again, when you look at Cincinnati, we talked about this earlier in the week, Jawan Briggs, Dante Corleone, Cincinnati's D-line's legit. An odd front construct, much like what we do. Some of their blitz packages are similar to what we do, but they got nasty studs. And they were a handful for that Pitt offense, and Pitt didn't have any answers. And it just continued. They continued to try and push the football downfield more and more. And through 2 games, the result has been 34 pressures against Phil Dracovic, which is easily the most in the ACC. I mean, Cincinnati, for those who didn't see the game, was all over him. I mean, he was harassed for the
He took some big hits.
He took some. I texted you guys a couple of the shots that when I was watching on tape, I was like, dude, you can't hold on to it like that. I mean, he's just begging to take a shot. But
some of those sacks he took, I couldn't believe he didn't fumble. I mean, he's just getting blindsided. Yeah,
that's a big-handed 6'5" kid, right? Otherwise, you're exactly right, Wes. He would have. So when you look at the analytics and study some of the metrics, they support what I saw for the balance of 60 minutes, not just against Cincinnati, but sometimes even in a good performance and a solid performance against Wofford a week earlier, sometimes he held on to it a little long then. But let's start with this. He holds on to the football on average. His average time to throw is 4.19 seconds. That's the second highest in the ACC. Now, for a frame of reference, that might mean nothing to you without a number, okay? Another number to compare it to. So basically 4.2 seconds. He's holding on to the football. Garrett is 3.4. You see what I'm getting at here? Now, ours is more RPO based, and there are more quick answer, quick delivery throws attached to it. But here's another one for you. There's a number that they track, and it's called intended air yards. So that's basically the number of yards that all your passes travel in the air, whether they're caught or not. They stack that all up, and it's a category called IAY, intended air yards. His intended air yards, and this is where you start to the numbers start to tell the story, are 5th most in Power 5. Now, what's interesting about that, he's 5th most in intended air yards, but he has 23 fewer pass attempts than any of the guys in front of him.
Jeez.
That starts to tell you how much and how often and how frequently they're pushing the football deep.
Just running go routes.
Well, deeper concepts, a lot of go routes with some other things mixed in there, but he's hitting less than 50% of his throws. You talked about after coming off a 10 for 32 performance, it's hard not to be hitting less than 50% of your throws. So he's thrown the ball 55 times, 27 receptions or 27 completions. Now, to get a little deeper, 35 of his 55 been on target. 39 of his 55 have even been catchable. So that gives you some indication as what's been going on here. But I keep going back to that pressure number. 34 pressures through just 2 games. The lion's share of those, of course, came against Cincinnati. Now, Pitt's most targeted receiver is Bub Means, a returning starter from a year ago. Very talented, large-framed kid. He's a handful, right? But through 2 games, it hasn't really clicked. They've targeted him 15 times. He has 2 catches. So, again, it's not like a bunch of bubble screens. They're pushing the football deep, trying to take their shots, and it so far just hasn't worked. Now, Bub Means, let's go back to that number. I talked about the intended air yards. Bub Means alone has 333 intended air yards, the most by a wide margin in the ACC. So you're starting to get some feel as to what the struggles have been all about. Now, when they fell behind, I mean, you know the DNA of Pat Narduzzi. He's a defensive-oriented head coach. That's his pedigree. He wants to run the football and have balance. That's one of the reasons that he kind of was at odds with Mark Whipple, who was the coordinator when Kenny Pickett was there, putting up those big numbers in the pass game, right? So he brings in Cignetti. Whipple goes off to Nebraska. Here comes Cignetti for a much more balanced approach and philosophy on the offensive side. And again, when you had Izzy as a 1,400-yard rusher a year ago, it really worked. They had 5 returning starters on that offensive line last year. It really worked. But so far, again, really two returning starters, and they have a transfer from Cal who was a starter. So it's not quite the same offensive line from a continuity standpoint. It takes a couple games to gel, right? Now, Bartholomew's back at tight end. That's ultimately going to help them. They do have a couple receivers back on the perimeter, but those receivers, they lost their quarterback in Keaton Slovis. Now, I did feel when I said this on the podcast, I thought Keaton Slovis struggled last year. Second lowest completion percentage in the ACC. Same type of thing. He was taking it and chucking it, not hitting his shots. He's off to BYU. I thought that they would get better play from the quarterback spot, more production from the quarterback spot. And I still think over the course of time they will. Let's hope it doesn't start this week against West Virginia. But they haven't had that run game to lean on. Now, if I'm forecasting what this might look like, you have to figure out here's what is going on in the Pitt offensive meeting room. Okay. They're studying tape and they're watching our struggles on the back end. And they're saying, hey, there's some opportunities against this West Virginia secondary. For whatever reason, through two games, they've struggled and they haven't solved all those issues from a year ago quite yet. So we think we have some opportunities, especially as a team that loves to push it downfield anyway by our very nature. That's our DNA. So how can we find a way to hold up and protect long enough to capitalize on some of the shots that we think we can make the most of downfield? And that's what they're talking about. Meanwhile, as they're having this conversation in the offensive meeting room, the door opens up behind them, and guess who pokes his head in? Pat Narduzzi. Hey. You remember that last week when you threw on the first 3 plays of the game? I don't like that. That's not what I'm about. All right. You better be mixing the run game in there and find a way to establish it. I know you haven't been able to do it so far. I mean, they really struggled to run the ball against Cincinnati. Part of it was they fell behind. Part of it, again, Cincinnati is really salty in that front seven. So somewhere between those two things, the truth will lie, I figure. They want to take their shots. They know they have to max protect to do it. And at the same time, they saw a Duquesne quarterback slip outside, break contain, buy an extra 3 or 4 seconds for more stress and maximize pressure on our secondary. So I would say that's going to be part of their plan as well, kind of move the launch point and see if they can get Jerkovich outside the pocket so he's a moving target to buy the receivers a little more time to try and pick on our back end. So West Virginia, first and foremost, is going to have to find a way to pressure him. But at the same time, if they come out and establish the run, and that's going to make throwing the football a whole lot easier for them. So I think it's going to be critical for us on some level to try and make them somewhat one-dimensional, kind of like we did last year. We thought that they would have some success running against us last year, and we kind of corralled them. So we're going to have to need to find a way to do it once again this year. Now, I have in front of me here, and I'll toss to you guys to get your thoughts. I kept the 2 deep from Acrisure Stadium last year. I just wanted to see,
burn it.
It's interesting to see the changes is why I like to look at these things, like in the lineups, the changes. So defensively, which is what we're talking about first, defensively, West Virginia returns basically 5 starters. Well, really 4.5, depending on how you want to look at it. Jared Bartlett started in that game. All 3 D linemen are gone. Dante, Jordan Jefferson, Taj Alston. So Jared Bartlett, okay, Bandit, he started last year. At will linebacker was Lance Dixon, now in the mix at Spear. Lee Koba started at Mike. Aubrey Burks obviously started on the back end. And Marcus Floyd started in that game. And he's projected to most likely be back against Pitt Saturday. So those are the 5 that are in the mix. So they've kind of seen this offensive construct before. It's just how similar will it be to last year? I don't know the answer to that. Are they going to push it deep early and try and get a lead and then run the ball? They're going to try and mix the run game in, do both. What are your guys' thoughts?
I mean, honestly, for me, a lot was just said there. So I'll kind of, review what I'm thinking as far as on top of what you said. I think that loss last week puts them in a little bit of a salty nature. I think, not saying so much they're overlooking us, but I feel like that's kind of always the attitude with Pitt and West Virginia. Pitt always kind of just says, hey, we're going to come in there, we're going to dominate, we're going to do our thing. Losing to Cincinnati, I think, I'm sure this week's worth of practice has been probably amped up a little bit. So I'm sure they're going to be on edge a little bit as far as how Narduzzi brings them into the game. Definitely going to try to establish the run against. As far as West Virginia goes, I hope our D-line just keeps improving and builds off the last 2 weeks. I think because we have so much kind of newness there and guys who haven't gotten a ton of reps, I think, we're starting to kind of feel a little bit of a groove up front. So hopefully we can do well against shutting down their run. As far as our side of the ball goes, bringing the run game, we got to establish the run early. Have to establish the run early, and then I'd like to see the shots that we took basically last week to try to open them up on defense as well and kind of control that whole deal. But I think a key for us as far as defensively goes,
yes,
we're going to have to really baby the secondary and make sure that we're making plays. And not, it's okay to bend, right? But we don't want to break. We don't want to give up them big plays, kind of like we did in Penn State.
I don't think it's an accident, Owen, that, again, I'm looking at snap counts from the Duquesne game. I don't think it's an accident that Malachi Ruffin had 48 snaps, right? When you look at that mix, again, I think so far through 2 games, Beanie Bishop has kind of been as advertised. I mean, he looks so far to be what we were hoping to get through the portal when we brought him in. I mean, a guy that can play the ball, a guy that is most comfortable, I think, in coverage with the football in flight. Now, at the other spot, it's been a more of a battle. Again, Montre Miller hasn't played much through 2 games. He's not going to play this weekend, so he's not walking through that door. So we need to find an answer. And for whatever reason, when you look at Andrew Wilson-Lamb, a guy that looks the part, a guy that has the frame, a guy with the skill set and the talent and the tools. Andrew Wilson-Lamb's a guy that was an elite receiver in high school. So it's not like he's a guy without ball skills who's not comfortable with the football in flight. But for whatever reason, the confidence hasn't been there through limited snaps in 2 games when the ball was in flight. So I think one of the reasons that Malachi Ruffin ended up getting those 48 snaps, Malachi Ruffin might be a guy with a much more limited skill set, but he's kind of the chihuahua in the room. He thinks he's the size of a German Shepherd, right? And he has almost the perfect mentality for a corner. You're going to beat me, but I'm going to keep coming back and coming back and coming back, and I'm going to be aggressive, and I'm not going to back off just because you beat me. I always go back to the same anecdote when I think of him. Last year in the finale at Oklahoma State, made one of the most boneheaded plays you're ever going to see with that attempted strip, and gives you Wes is signaling if you're not watching on YouTube, the incomplete sign. The ball's caught. Meanwhile, the Oklahoma State receiver takes off upfield when he should have been tackling the kid. So he could have easily gone in the tank after that. I mean, he had to be embarrassed as all get out. Instead, later in the same game, the final sequence of snaps with Oklahoma State's offense on the field, he played a critical role with 2 passes defended to help us seal that win and stop them. That's the mentality of a corner that you want. In other words, he doesn't let limitations from a skill standpoint get in his way or hurt his confidence. He has, I remember Coach Wallace told us this when he was coaching at Colorado. He said they brought these specialists in to do psyche evals, and they wanted to do personality profiles to see what type of personality profile would best fit each position on a football team, right? And the personality or disposition that best fit the ideal or perfect corner, the same one that fits a jet fighter pilot. Short memory. You can't think back half a second or you'll pay for it. Yeah. Even if you make a mistake, you better not be dwelling on your mistake. You better be all eyes ahead. That's the mentality Malachi Ruffin has. Now you need to work towards developing that same type of mentality with some of the other corners. I mean, Beanie has some of that as well, but the skill's there. And now it's just a matter, you got to gain some of that confidence. Because again, you're facing a guy, one more number for you, as if you don't understand enough already. 29% of Phil Jerkovic's attempts have been 20 plus yards downfield. They're going to take their shots.
Yeah.
No doubt. And that also is the most in the ACC, the highest rate in the ACC. They're going to take their shots. Even if they establish the run, all they're going to do is use that to their advantage to go play action and take their shots. But they're going to take their shots. So be ready for it. Now, we do have some coverage wrinkles in play. After the Penn State game, there were some things that we worked at, some kinks. But you didn't want to put them on tape against Duquesne for obvious reasons. So part of it will be hopefully addressed through scheme. But at the end of the day, it's when they're trying to go vertical and you're trying to stop them, it's Jimmy's and Joe's. I mean, there's no secret here. Now, you can have some impact by doing what Cincinnati did and applying the heat in terms of winning some individual matchups at the point of attack, chopping your front up and getting some pressure in behind it. But at the same time, you're not always going to get home fast enough, especially if they're trying to max protect and take those shots. So that's what I'm looking at with this, guys.
I think that's well said. I got a question for you here, Jed. But first, I wanted to thank our friends at Toothman Ford as well, too, for being a presenting sponsor of this episode of ITG. We all know cars cost less in Grafton. Make sure you're checking out Toothman Ford for all your vehicle needs. They do so much to support us, to support our student athletes through NIL. Yeah. Toothman Ford, cars cost less in Grafton. Rodney Hammond is kind of their feature back now, right? Yeah, and you know, you mentioned Izzy earlier. He had a great season last year, 1,400 yards, like you said. He was, I think, a 5th-round pick of the New York Jets, right? So an NFL guy.
He's a player, yeah.
He's a good player. Had himself a really good preseason. You know, it's still early in the NFL season, obviously, but he had himself a really good preseason as a rookie. Good player. There's some people within the Pitt program that said, yeah, we know Izzy's great, but we actually think Hammond has the better all-around skill set as a running back.
Jalen Warren thing going west, but, don't you think?
I do. Yes, I agree with that. That's a good example. But my question is, as you laid out correctly, Narduzzi likes to run the football. He wants a balanced offense. He likes to run the football. He likes to be able to control the line, stop the run on defense and run the ball on offense, and then work everything else off of there. I mean, this is his 9th year as the head coach at Pitt. There's a large sample size of how he wants them to play. Hammond had 6 touches last week against Cincinnati. Is that just because they fell behind? That's just because they fell behind so early and had to throw to try and catch up?
A function of that. A lot of it is that's a great question. A lot of it was that. I think they planned to feature him far more prominently. He's kind of a shocked
me.
5'9", 2 bills plus. He kind of fell out of the game plan. They found themselves in a chase position, in a trail position. But just look at the culture of what Narduzzi has built at Pitt. 4 years in a row. It's not an accident. 4 years in a row, they've led the ACC in rush defense. Now, you don't do that with a quarterback going 10 for 32 every week.
Right.
You do that by an efficient pass game and running the ball to take the air out of the game with balance, right? So, again, that's the part of me that if there's when you look at the influence of a defensive-oriented head coach, that's the influence. If his fingerprints are going to be on the game plan offensively, that's what it's going to look like. Hey, this is nonsense. Enough of this 10 for 32 stuff. Stop with these deep shots. Establish the daggone run game and shorten the game. Help my defense out. Our strength of this football team is stopping the run. And we can't do that when you're going 10 for 32 throwing a football. Right. So all those things are interlinked, right? So that's a great question. I'm quite certain that, again, a little bowling ball type, when he gets uncorked, he's a handful. He's a handful. But Cincinnati jumped right out, in large measure, running the football. They popped some big ones, built that lead. And the next thing you know, the call sheet Cignetti has looks a lot different when you're, falling behind by a couple scores so quickly. So I think in a more ideal circumstance, they would have liked to have balance. They'd have liked to give him 18 or 20 touches, and it just got out of control and spiraled. And even when you look at it, like, part of it was in the second half, and this is where a bad situation tends to get worse. Now they found themselves much more predictable offensively because they had to throw the ball, right? So what ends up happening? They were double teaming Dante Corleone, and I'm telling you, we'll get into more Dante Corleone later in the season. Guys, he might be the best D lineman in the Big 12. He's nasty, okay? So in the first half, they were double teaming him. Well, in the second half, he was getting singled up because they had to be more predictable in what they were trying to do, and they didn't have the benefit of unpredictability. So they had to do a little more be a little more desperate in terms of what their play selection was. But so once things fall off script, a lot of bad stuff is downstream from that. And that's what Pitt found out from an offensive play selection standpoint. They didn't go into that game saying, hey, he's our bowling ball. He's our new feature back. He's trying to replace a 1,400-yard rusher. Let's give him the ball 6 times against Cincinnati. No, that's not by design. That's not what that conversation through the week sounded like, but that's just the way things unfolded.
That makes sense. It does. And that's what I figured, but I just wanted to pick your brain on that as well, too. Okay, before we spin the block to the other side here, I got a question for Big O. First. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say this. Owen, you made a good point, and I want you to talk about this, too. We've talked through camp, and so has Jordan Leslie, about the fact that we might have an 8 or 9 man rotation. Okay. Well, we got a Sonny Redwood back this week. Guys, it might be a 10 man rotation because here comes Corey McIntyre doing some really cool things. So, from a snap count standpoint, again, once the game got out of control, we eased off the gas and we started in a very liberal way substituting along that defensive line. So Eddie V led all D linemen with 33 snaps. Lockhart, Sean Martin obviously coming next. D Hawkins up to 18 snaps. We want to see that continue to be in that ballpark or right around it. Tomey with 17 snaps. He earned that with his production against Penn State. Jalen Thornton, 17 snaps. This is all very meaningful in terms of what the future rotation of this D line might look like. Fatorma Mulba, 11 snaps, so he hit double digit. And Hammond Russell, remember, we talked about the impact he had last week in very limited snaps. This week, he doubled it up to 9. So we're getting there. I mean, that game last week was meaningful for this D-line rotation because you got to keep those guys fresh. But to keep them fresh and to substitute the way you want, each one, not each one, but it's kind of divided or dichotomized. This group is different skill sets for different kids. So we said, hey, if you're ahead of schedule and forcing the offense off schedule, you can choose the substitutions you want. And that's kind of what happened last week, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They got to step up, right? They're going to have a big game. They got a big target to hit. They're going to have to put some pressure on them and get through that Pitt offensive line. And, like you were mentioning before, kid likes to extend the plays, right? So we're going to have to be able to contain him and just basically make him feel it, man. We're going to have to make him feel it.
Guys, you look at a 6'5", 240 kid and you think statue. He has 10 rushing touchdowns in his career. He's sneaky athletic. So he can move around, and he can certainly move around enough to extend a play.
Yeah,
absolutely
definitely
can.
Gonna have to be a big game by the front guys.
Yep.
Yeah, without a doubt. You got to keep him under duress. You got to try and make them one-dimensional. You can't let him get comfortable back there because he does have
communication issues. So I'd love to be in position to try and confuse him. That's what I'd like to do. Because if you can induce any level of indecision, that's where the big plays are going to come. That's where the sacks are going to come, right? But you got to get him off schedule to be able to do that. But go ahead, Wes.
So before we spin the block, here's the question I wanted to ask the Big O. Pitt plays Cincinnati last week at home, right? Night game, rival, by their standards, pretty big crowd, right? Without WVU or Penn State or Notre Dame being in town, that game it plays out weird too because Pitt falls behind big time early and then they kind of claw back into it and you get the hope of like, okay, they intercept the football, they intercept Cincinnati with like 3 minutes left and you think, okay, we're going to tie this thing, we're going to win this thing after being down 20 points in the second half. This is amazing. And then that door gets shut and Cincinnati ends up holding on to the victory. Now they have to so you get up for that rivalry game, River City rivalry, Cincinnati, back and forth kind of, well, not back and forth, but an emotional game in its own way of feeling like you're out of it, then back in it and then getting your hopes crushed. Now you got to re-gear, go on the road for your biggest rival in West Virginia. And I know like Cincinnati is, Pitt's biggest rival is WVU and Penn State, even though them and Penn State have that weird, like they want to kiss each other, but they don't want to kiss each other. And they each think that they're better. They each think that they're sanctimonious. Like we're better than you. No, we're better than you. No, we're unrivaled. No, you need us. No, you need us. It's not Penn State, but to go from Cincinnati to WVU, right? Did you ever have, Owen, back-to-back rivalry games like that? Did you ever do Louisville and Pitt or Pitt and Syracuse, something? Do you remember ever have it? Like, I wonder what the psychology of back-to-back rivalry games is like.
That's a good man. Go ahead and talk. I'm gonna look it up on.
Yeah, we might have, honestly. When we were such an underdog from the start of my career at first, and then built into this kind of train that really was chugging along for those 3 years that I was there. I would say that every game kind of had its and that was the Big East. It almost felt like kind of every week was a rivalry game just because
it's true.
We were just so close.
The history there, and
you know what I mean? And I would say, even looking at it from that perspective, not really remembering if we did have games like that, and we could have.
You had Louisville, Cincinnati, Pitt in 06, 3 in a row.
Ooh,
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
And that was
so,
the number 5 Louisville team. That game down there.
yeah, so that's when we lost, right? And then we end up. You said Louisville, then Pitt.
Cincinnati,
Louisville,
Pitt.
Cincinnati, Pitt. You guys won both of
Yeah.
those two, right?
Oh
06
wait, that was 05, right?
or
06.
05.
06. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm emotionally, I mean, they're all emotional, you know, and then I know some of those were OT games, so the games were just even, you know, kind of blown even more out of proportion. But I think the coaches did a really good job back then for us, just getting ready for, you know, there was always the hype that they had put on us as far as, you know, the other team. Rod does a great job, and so does the coaches, just getting everyone prepared for those games, whether it would have just been someone, you know, whoever, and then a rivalry game after that, like even Virginia Tech or some, or
Sure.
you know. But emotionally, I would say it's or you know, kind of like how you said the question. Each game was just as important. That was the emphasis that I feel like we always put on every game. So I'm not saying that
You weren't thinking of it in that context.
yeah, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't like that. It was they were all within due respect, just as important as the other one.
The next game's the biggest
Yes,
game. Yeah.
yes. And you know, back then we played Pitt at the end of the season.
Yeah.
So
As God intended.
exactly, for real. You know, Thanksgiving, that was the game.
That's right.
That was
Yeah.
the
Perfect.
that was the game.
Eat your
But
turkey and hunt
so
your
Chef's
panther,
kiss
baby.
right there. Chef's
yes,
kiss.
yes.
But Rich was, you're right, Owen. Rich was very good, Wes, at sensing when his team wasn't to the level of focus that he thought they should be. And by midweek, Wednesday, Thursday, he let you know. And
Oh,
and
yeah.
Owen, the line he always fell back to, his default line was, "They will like embarrass your ass." You remember the
Oh,
little,
yeah.
he'd shift his hips and finger go down, and they will
Jed
embarrass you.
does such a
This
good
group will
Jed,
embarrass, and you're
It's
sitting there thinking,
great.
"Whoa," you know. But he recognized when you weren't dialed in, and you got that little attention getter, right? And
Mhm.
he gave it to you. He did. I remember being on the business end of that a handful of times when we were at Glenville, and I'm sure he
Uh-huh.
did it at West Virginia. But he was, like Owen said, he was pretty good at that.
Well, I
Yeah.
don't think being dialed in will be a problem Saturday night for either
No,
team.
no, not at all. Now think about this, Wes, because Owen and I, we were debating, it'd be cool if Pitt came in 2-0 because then you could steal their thunder.
Sure.
But which is better, to knock them off when they're 2-0 and all excited and amped up, or to send them off losers to the preseason number 14 and number 13 teams in the Big 12 media poll?
The latter, and even more so,
Yes.
Jed, kind of the picture that I painted at the start of the show of some of the tumultuous nature of the week, that their quarterback getting booed and then ripping on the fans, and the Pud and Narduzzi doubling. I would love to be like, it would be great if they would have rolled Cincinnati, and right now they were ranked like 22nd or 23rd in the nation, something like that, right? That would certainly be fun. But you have an opportunity to knock them to 1-2, where their only win is against Wofford, before they even hit conference play, which suddenly, all of a sudden, like, we make jokes about the ACC and how easy, but they got UNC, they got Florida State, they got Notre Dame. They've still got
they'd be
4-2
with losses to the preseason number 13 and
correct,
number 14
and then there'd be
the
the Big 12
that
bragging
might be the
thing
best
there,
part.
and yes, and
Shows you
listen,
what the media would know, right?
Exactly. And that's the thing too. I mean, you guys know I'm pretty dialed in on these things with my job and my connections and the people I work with and all those things. Like, there's some real turbulence around the program this week, which is insane to me, because they've won 20 games in the last 2 years. Like, they won an ACC championship, 11 wins.
In the early 80s.
Then they came back last year and won 9 games. They got 20 wins in the last 2 seasons. They had a Heisman finalist a couple years ago. They've got back-to-back seasons of first-round draft picks in the NFL draft.
Defensive Player of the Year.
ACC Defensive Player of the Year, back-to-back first-round picks in the draft. All these, they've had like 12 guys drafted the last 2 drafts, 11 guys drafted the last 2 years, something crazy like that.
Wes, if we beat them,
And
let's put the
well,
court.
hold on, real quick.
I wanted to ask you
Just
something. Go ahead.
after one sloppy loss to Cincinnati, they're like, I'm done with this team. I'm done with this coach. I'm done with this quarterback. So to take gasoline and match and throw it on and to be the ones to throw them into that fire, I mean, that to me is that's what I'm licking my lips and my chops here hoping to do. I mean, we could really send them into a spiral potentially. Yeah.
And so what I wanted to ask you, because you're exactly right. I mean, they struggled against Cincinnati. The fans started turning on them pretty quickly. If to put the cart before the horse,
that's what Pitt fans do. They only support a winner.
All 6 of them. They got upset. And
they only support a winner. I mean, God forbid, we've had the best 2 back-to-back seasons we've had in 40 years, but we play one bad game against Cincinnati and I'm out.
I did Pittsburgh media, I told you yesterday, and I asked the dude off air, I was like, well, hey, what's the vibe? They're still talking about the Steelers law. I'm like, see, it's just so different in that world. But let me ask you,
it's funny, real quick. It's funny you say that, Jed, because the flagship station of the Pitt Panthers, they've had a lot of conversation this week of like, doesn't the Backyard Brawl kind of feel blah this year? I mean, both fan bases are down on their team, which again is hilarious when you consider the last 2 seasons that Pitt has had versus the last 2 seasons that we've had.
Yes.
It's just, it's not quite the same, and it's a little blah. And listen, maybe on your side, because all you care about is the Steelers and Pitt when things are going well, right? But here in Morgantown, where we haven't hosted those guys since 2011, where that loudmouth head coach has been taking unsolicited shots at our fans, at our program, at our stadium, at our academics, everything over the last year, our side is ready to go. Yeah, don't project your Steelers sadness and your lack of wanting to be a Pitt fan through the hard times. And I use air quotes because if your hard times is losing a 1-score game to Cincinnati when you've had your best 2 years in 4 decades, I'd say you've been pretty spoiled lately. But yeah, that's it. They only get hyped for a winner, Jed. So despite 20 wins over the last 2 seasons, which is more than they've had since Dan Marino was in school in the 80s, one sloppy loss to Cincinnati and I'm out. I'm just a frustrated Steeler fan.
Well, here's what I want to ask you. If they lose to us, knock on wood, let's put the cart before the horse, and let's just, again, I like to live in hope and goodwill. So let's assume that's the case.
Owen's laughing. Owen's enjoying this.
Are they 1-4? Because they go to North Carolina. Now, here's North Carolina's situation. North Carolina has Minnesota at home this week. So either they'll be playing a 3-0 North Carolina team, or a North Carolina team that just lost and is pissed off to Minnesota. I don't see Drake May losing twice in a row at home. So, and for that matter, I don't see Drake May at 3-0 losing to Pitt. So it's a tough situation they're stepping into if they don't find a way to get their act together. Now, they very well could. This is an even matchup, and depending on where you look, they're actually favored. So that could happen. But could we send them spiraling to 1-4? Could this be the loss that we talked in the last episode? I think if we beat them, it's already one game that was 2 losses, because I think they lost to Cincinnati in part because they were looking ahead to us. That had something to do with that. So does one game turn into 3 losses? Is there a hangover? And it would be so difficult for them with all the questions to recover and go to North Carolina. North Carolina's already survived their annual tilt with Appalachian State, their annual scare, right? So they got that behind them. Yeah. So that's an explosive, dynamic, dangerous North Carolina.
Jed, there's been Pitt people this week that have said, I hope Narduzzi leaves for Michigan State after this year. Like, really? Do you remember where your program was 9 years ago when he got there? Where you were going through Todd Graham and Mike Haywood and Paul Christ and a new coach every season or 2 because nobody wanted to be with your mediocre jabroni program that nobody cares about?
Well, it was one of Todd Graham's 8 dream jobs. So
That's right. And then his dream changed to Arizona State, and then it changed to something else. But it's weird because, again, when you look at the last 2 seasons that they've had, you would think that they would have a grace period. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like you would think there'd be a longer leash there. Absolutely. But I think they come down to Morgantown and lose, and they're 1-2 all of a sudden after. I mean, those fans expected to have another 10-win season this year, and they're 1-2 all of a sudden with losses to their 2 rivals on the schedule, and they still got a UNC and a ranked Duke team, and Florida State, who's one of the best teams in the country, and a trip to Notre Dame as well too, to South Bend. they will turn on loudmouth D-bag of the year Narduzzi real quick, and they will certainly turn on Phil Jerkovich, who, you know, would have 3 starts and his only win would be against Wofford, despite the Pine Richland, the homecoming kid, and Phil Jerkovich this summer saying all WPIAL kids should go to Pitt, even though he went to 2 other colleges and spurned Pitt twice before he finally decided to go there.
It's like half the WPIAL's coming home. I mean, that's his portal approach, you know. That's his plan through the portal.
Yeah, he got the safety from Florida who was a WPIAL kid as well too.
Kid coming back to Southwest.
Yeah. I mean, listen, if you want to put the cart before the horse, I've been trying not to get excited about that possibility this week because they know too. I mean, listen, I talk a lot of trash, but their fans are aware of what's going on. Like, they know that we're not exactly over the moon about the status of our football program, right? We've had 3 losing seasons in the last 4 years. The first time that's happened since the 70s. Like, Pitt fans know this too. They make all those jokes online about Neil Brown and about our record and how we, you know, didn't go to a bowl game last year and all these different things. For them to lose to us, to that team, to that, you know, a program that's in kind of the state of flux that we're in, and to do it when they thought they were going to win 10 games again this season and Jerkovich was going to be the dude. And it would be incredible. It would be incredible.
Double win. In other words, what you want, what's a perfect environment or scenario in sports? You want to damage your rival.
Correct.
To the maximum possible. But
Correct.
At the same time, you want to put yourself in the best position possible. And it would serve both those masters. It really would. If we could win this game and be sitting there at 2-1 on Sunday, getting ready for Texas Tech, who we haven't beat since 2018. Wow. Can you imagine a Texas Tech team that has its own questions, right? So if we could take care of business, and not only take care of business, but maybe it's something that, I mean, each game you're looking for some question to be answered. Like, you come out of the Penn State game, and as frustrating as it might have been, you're looking at it saying, hey, that D-line, not so bad, right? Maybe we got something there. You come out of the Duquesne game, you're thinking, hey, this Hudson Clement kid in the pass game, and whoa, what's going on? So what might be the thing if you come out of a win against Pitt that you're adding to that stockpile of positives that you try and build forward and string some things together? I mean, it's all about stacking pennies. And when you're trying to stack a penny that looks like Pitt, that's never a penny. That's a 50-cent piece or a Susan B. Anthony dollar. I mean, whatever you want to call it, or a gold nugget, whatever it might be. But if you can stack that when you're getting ready for Texas Tech and building towards something while at the same time damaging the daylights out of Pitt, it just doesn't get any better than that.
And that's the opportunity. You know, I mean, we're sitting with a guy here on the podcast who, you know, obviously Pitt derailed a lot in 2007. Now, to Owen's credit and all those guys' credit, they were able to keep that thing humming, went and won the Fiesta Bowl, rolled right into the Geno and Stedman and Tavon era. And we did not fall face off of a cliff after losing Rod, after losing that opportunity, all those things. But you beat this team. Their season spirals. I mean, maybe they still go 6-6 or 7-5 or something like that, right? But certainly not the type of year that they thought they were going to have. Pat Narduzzi leaves because he thinks, all right, these people here never look at what I did, where I took this program, and now they're crushing me after one down season.
Me in front of 1,700 people.
In front of 1,700 people, all wearing black and gold. I gotta go to Steelers practice, and that Wes Uhler jabroni with the good hair is for some reason wearing a West Virginia hat. What's he doing? I mean, it could be some nice payback in that regard.
It's easy to say, and it's low hanging fruit, and credit where credit's due. I think all things being equal, Narduzzi's got that thing as humming as well as you could expect. Again, 20 wins for the first time since 81-82.
He just almost said Narduzzi there, didn't he, Owen?
Right? I mean, if you can't win 20 games and have enough goodwill in two years, have enough goodwill to say, hey, that's enough. We still got your back. We're still going to support you. We're still going to turn out. They never turn out. They weren't turning out when you were winning.
Jed, we had more people at a home game against Duquesne than they did the first time playing Cincinnati in a decade. Cincinnati.
I mean, I'm sitting there watching the game tape, and it hits the scoreboard. And sometimes you see crowd shots, and I'm like, wow, this is just.
And you know what's funny too? A good handful of those people at the Pitt Cincinnati. Well, there was obviously a decent amount of Cincinnati fans who travel. You know, it's 4.5 hours away, not too far. Border states, that kind of thing. There were also a good amount of San Francisco 49ers that just went to, because they were in town for the Steeler game the next day, and they were like, we could get a ticket to this game for $6. Let's go. That's a college football game, ACC, Big 12. Let's do it. And we all know too, Pat Narduzzi is a prideful guy. I think we can say that in the least. So, I mean, yeah, I could see him saying, F these people. Look what I've done for you for a decade. Look where you guys lost to Youngstown State at home before I took over. Youngstown State, 1AA, went into Heinz Field.
At least I'm losing to Western Michigan. I mean, come on.
At least I'm losing to Western Michigan.
Yeah.
But and again, anybody who's listened to this podcast when we talk about Pitt knows my feelings on Pat Narduzzi. All right. I mean, there's a lot of people in Pittsburgh that don't like Pat Narduzzi. There's a lot of people within his own building that don't like Pat Narduzzi because he's the D-bag of the year. But look at where that program was 9 years ago. They lost to Youngstown State. They were losing to Ohio, not Ohio State, Ohio.
The Bobcats, baby.
Before he took over. So he does deserve credit in that regard of taking them from perennial 5 wins a season to 20 wins in 2 years and ACC champions and first round picks and Heisman finalists. He Narduzzi deserves credit for that. But he's also the type of guy who could, I think, yes, say, F these people. I'm leaving. I'm going somewhere where they appreciate me because look at what I've done. It's never going to be enough.
In the modern era of college football, the game has changed so many ways, and we've talked about all of them. When Pitt was good, when they won the national title in '76 with Kavanaugh, and when Rick Turcano and Dan Marino, and they had that run, okay, it was a different world in college football. Now, the attention span of the average sports fan in America has dissipated. It's like people have the attention span of a ferret on speed now. So in a place like Pittsburgh, and we've talked about this before, when Andy Van Slyke came and played for the Pirates, he came from a baseball city in St. Louis where he played for the Cardinals, and he showed up in Pittsburgh, and he said, when you play for the Pirates in the city of Pittsburgh, you very quickly learn it's our Steelers, our Penguins, the Pirates. He didn't even mention Pitt. I mean, that's really all you need to know. That's how much of an afterthought.
Well, Jed, that's because they're not a Pittsburgh sports team. They're a university located in Pittsburgh, but they're not a Pittsburgh sports team.
Right? So that's kind of what you're looking at. So for Narduzzi to do what he has done in this modern era,
no, it's impressive.
It's so difficult to attract and keep the attention of fans in a place like that. I think he's maximized that brand. And he has to be looking at it with his head on a swivel thinking, there's nothing else I can do. And this is the best. This is as good as this gets. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to bring recruits in to a half-empty stadium, and this is as good as it gets.
But
my rival last year, and it took my rival getting here to fill this stadium to the point. The only thing you care enough about to come fill this stadium to give me the largest crowd in the history of the city of Pittsburgh is my rival coming. Otherwise, nobody shows up for anybody else. What is this all about? So he has to, on some level, feel frustrated in that he has maximized this thing, and now he's just trying to keep it humming. But
the other side of that too, Jed, is they come to Morgantown, they get a victory, it kickstarts their season, and they go 9-3.
And then they go, they're full of energy. Maybe they upset North Carolina.
Right. And then maybe they win a bowl game, and all of a sudden they're 10-3, and they've got 30 wins in the last 3 years, and there's still only 40,000-50,000 people there if they're not playing somebody, but he at least in theory keeps that thing. It's a I mean, we all know this. I'm not breaking any news. It's a big game for Neil Brown and company, but I think same church, different pew. It's a big game for Narduzzi and Jerkovich and company too, because they are teetering right on that line of losing just like that 2 weeks. They could lose all the goodwill that they built up over the last 2 seasons. And again, we have a chance to be the ones to match.
He was asked this week already, hey, was there any point where you considered making a move at quarterback? He was already asked that.
Mm-hmm. He sure was.
Turmoil.
And that's, again, we've got an opportunity to really kick them when they're down after the week that they've had. And like I said, I've been trying not to let my mind wander to that place because I don't want to get too excited, but that would be a nice palate cleanser after what happened last year. And I think a good building point for us as well too. All right, Jed, let's spin the block here.
Part of it's that, Wes. You talked about Rodney Hammond. Let's hit it here. Let's close with this. Nobody really knows who Rodney Hammond is at West Virginia, right? For a reason. If that stays true, I like our chances.
Great call.
Mountaineer fans don't know who Rodney Hammond is come Sunday morning. I like our chances, but go ahead.
Well said. Well said. Another thank you to Fortis for presenting this episode of ITG for roof performance and financial security guaranteed. Make sure you visit fortis.us.com. For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
For more West Virginia Mountaineer football content, be sure to follow us on Twitter @InTheGunPodcast.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
Let's go, Mountaineer fans. You're tuned in to In the Gun with Wes, the runaway beer truck, and the signal caller.
All right, Jed. Other side of the ball, spin the block, Mountaineer offense, Pitt defense. What are we looking at?
I don't think there's many secrets. Again, his culture is built on stopping the run. He wants to reduce you to one dimension and then set out attacking that dimension. He's done a great job over the course of the last 4 years in doing that. Number one in the last 4 years in the ACC against the run. Now, part of that, the way they track stats in the NCAA, they have the most sacks of any team in college football since 2019. So that's 199 sacks. It's 199 times, right? The way they track stats in college football. Am I disrupting again?
You
Okay.
kind of cut up there. You kind of cut there for a second, but we got you.
Okay, so again, they like to pressure you and they like to stop the run. So when you put that together, and what are you expecting them to come to do coming into West Virginia? Well, let's think about this. First of all, last year, the Mountaineers ran for 190 yards against them. You think that's not been eaten away at Pat Narduzzi for 12 months? Now, compound that with the fact that last week, this guy that I'm telling you, I think Pat Narduzzi hates being run on more, or at least as much as he hates losing. I really do. I really do. So a couple things that come to mind. His last game as D coordinator at Michigan State, they played Baylor in the Cotton Bowl. They gave up 603 yards passing. I'm not sure he cared at all. First of all, they found a way to win 42-41. Over the top big play, don't care. Over the top big play, don't care. I'm smashing the mouth. I'm stopping its point of attack. You're not going to run the ball me. You're not going to run the ball me. I remember Mason Rudolph in 2017. I remember studying this game before we played Oklahoma State. In 2017, in a non-con game early in the season, Oklahoma State came to what was then Heinz Field. They shredded Pitt. I mean, Pitt's trying to run that coverage.
So much so that
downhill.
So Jed, so much so that the Steelers drafted 2 guys from that Oklahoma State offense the next season.
Yes, they looked at it. They said, "Hey, this Rudolph guy and James Washington, not so bad." So
good
quarters coverage against RPOs, deep ball. Oklahoma State had 516 total yards in the first half because Narduzzi, being stubborn as he was, wanted to stop the run. Now, Oklahoma State ended up throwing for 572 yards that day, but they only ran for 104. Again, stop me when you see a pattern emerging. He doesn't want you to run the ball on him. So back it up. West Virginia ran for 190 last year. He's been seething over that, I promise you, all off season. Last week, what did Cincinnati do? Cincinnati ran the ball for 216 yards. Now, to give you some perspective, that was just the fourth time in the last 54 games that a team has run for 200 yards on him. What do you think the defensive meeting room sounds like this week? I don't care what happens. They are not going to beat us running the football. They got a seasoned, battle-tested offensive line. They're 3 deep at running back. That's the strength and the very obvious strength of West Virginia's offense. They can't beat us running the football. So what does that mean? That means he's going to be willing and inclined. And even with Cincinnati, I'm watching early in the game. He's throwing 6, 7, sometimes even 8, and downhill as resources toward the box. They're missing some tackles, and Cincinnati's actually popping some things to the second and third level in the run game. They had a jet sweep that Pitt failed to keep contained because they caught him in a run blitz on the interior. They weren't making plays, Pitt wasn't, but they were throwing numbers at the box. So I think you're going to see a smarter version of some of that. And what that means is it's going to come down to individual matchups, mano-a-mano on the perimeter, because you're going to have some single coverage opportunities if you're in that West Virginia receiver room. You're just going to. Now, the role that Garrett Green is going to need to play, first of all, when I look at Garrett Green, his skill set has always been, he's a great deep ball thrower because first he spins it and he has the arm strength, but the deep ball is so much about timing, and he's always had that natural timing, structurally, that timing that it takes, okay? So we know what he is when he tucks it and goes. He's one of the fastest kids on the team. He's a true lethal threat when he sees a crease and can go. But from a deep ball standpoint, in his career, if you look at deep balls, in other words, passes beyond 20 yards even, if you want to look at the metrics, he's completed 44%. Now, I'm just saying when you reduce it down to that one element of their game, that's what it looks like. He can throw the deep ball and he can hurt you with his legs. So in that sense, if the receivers come through and win some of these single coverage matchups, I think Garrett Green is built to take advantage of what Pitt's going to try and do to defend you.
Yeah.
Because he can throw the deep ball, but also, Owen, what happens when somebody drops numbers toward the box and they don't make the play at the point of attack and it does bust to the second level? That second level evaporates. And the next thing you know, there's no safety net, there's no catcher's net. And a guy like Garrett Green can see that, boom, next thing you know, instruments up for the band. So I think that potentially if the O-line plays like we know they can, and if some wideouts on the perimeter make plays, and I'm also interested to see what new wrinkles might we have with the 6-7 target we're so excited about, we've seen production out of in the tight end room. What might we be able to accomplish if, in fact, Garrett can either make a guy miss or even in the run game? Let's say on one of those zone reads, Owen, he decides to tuck it because he sees the 5 technique pinch. Even in the run game, if you miss him, he can make you pay. Or for that matter, what if they miss a run fit and CJ gets to the second level? Again, that safety net's gone. And when you look at what they're missing defensively, they have some kids back, no doubt about it. But I think they're missing 2 critical pieces to what they had defensively last year. We talked about the defensive player of the year in the ACC. Kalijah Clancy was a disruptor on the defensive line. That D tackle, he was nasty. There's a reason he was drafted when he was a first-round pick in the NFL draft. He had, 14 TFLs last year. He was consistently disruptive. But the guy that directed traffic and made things happen and set the table for them defensively was Servassier Dennis, the Mike backer. He's gone. Now, they have some talented, and I would even say watching tape, some smart backers. But Servassier Dennis really put them in position, made the calls. He was the quarterback of that unit. He had a great game against the Mountaineers. He had 10 tackles. He had a sack. He was very productive in us and played a critical role in that Pitt win last year. He's gone. So they might have some key pieces back, but they have some critical pieces to replace. And through 2 games, I'm not so sure that I've seen them quite yet replace those critical pieces up to the same standard. I mean, when you're looking, not Devonshire, but when you're looking at Dennis, we're going to Devonshire in a minute. But when you're looking at Servassier Dennis, that kid led them in tackles each of the last 2 seasons. He was the heartbeat of that defense. That's
he was their emotional leader as well too.
Absolutely, he was.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I remember watching them on tape last year, how impressed I was by him, both inside the lines and even some of the things after the play you'd see him do, or some of the things he'd do pre-snap, setting them up in the best spot. So they're not quite there yet. Now, over the course of a week, you might in fact see a much different team, because I kind of look at it like this. They say the most improvements made between week 1 and week 2. Well, when you're throwing an FCS team in the mix like we did and they did, that might not be as true. It might be week 2 to week 3, because now you really have 2 games on tape, one against a quality opponent, and you know what your weaknesses and your strengths are, and you can coach accordingly. So we might in fact see Pitt, for whatever shortcomings they've had through 2 games, addressed in week 3, much like we hope we address our shortcomings. But that's kind of the nature of what they do. They're going to roll the dice. They're going to take some chances. And he wants to knock you off schedule, much like we talked about Penn State with Manny Diaz. What he will do, what Pat Narduzzi will do, is take chances and roll the dice. There's a reason that he's forced 45 takeaways in the last 2 years, 45 turnovers. Guys, Pitt has 8 pick sixes in the last 2 years. Devonshire against us last year, that was one of 8 in the last 2 years. They make their own fortune. They're around the football. They apply pressure. You have to play smart football, but more so than anything, you have to make the plays that are on the table for you to make. If you're going to roll the dice and say, hey, I'm going to disrupt you and knock you off schedule, but to do that, I'm going to take risks on my back end. Well, you need to make them pay for doing that. So whether it's Devin Carter, whether it's, dare we say, Hudson Clement, whether we say Cortez Braham, don't look now, but our speed guy, E.J. Horton, is about to make his first appearance. Mountaineer fans haven't seen him. It might even be as simple as a 40-yard incompletion to E.J. Horton just to scare him straight. I mean, it might be something like that. But again, Garrett, love the deep ball he throws. I always have. I think he's starting to take the next step as an overall superintendent of the offense. That's the next step he needs to take. He's thrown the deep ball. He has the skill set as a dual threat. Now it's the little things that he's trying to manage, and he's getting better at doing so. But those are some of the things that I look at when I see Pitt defensively.
Yeah, I guess just to piggyback off of what Jed said, offensively for us, I mean, we got to kind of basically manhandle Pitt's D line. That has to be a thing. I like what I saw last week. I get it was Duquesne, but I like some of the plays that we were putting in. You know, the biggest thing for me, if a defense is going to load the box, or if they're going to bring a lot of pressure, like you said, Jed, we got to air it out, right? We got to get them out of that whole scheme and hurt them deep a couple times, and that'll end pretty quickly. It might just be me. I want to be optimistic about this WVU team, but I've liked what I've seen out of every running back that's been on the field. I loved last week them really starting to trust their reads. That's only going to benefit us in games to come with more reps and that camaraderie that the running backs have with the O-line. And as far as our wide receiver goes, we haven't really even gotten to see what they can do, because we've had injury here, injury there. We got young guys stepping up. We really do have a lot of weapons. So it's going to be interesting what happens as far as play calling right out the gate. I'd like to really see us start quick, because I feel like atmosphere is going to be jumping. It's going to be jamming, son. Let's get that first tutty in there quick. You know what I mean? First series. And then just kind of watch the tumble happen as the game goes on, maybe get a 3 and out, and then just watch the backs of the Panthers just absolutely crush. But I think
make them play from behind again too, right, Owen?
Yeah. And that's going to be
Rodney
super
Hammond
hard.
6 carries game, right? I mean, that's
right. Yeah, make them chase it. That's the one thing a Pat Narduzzi team that never wants to do is have to chase the game.
Yeah, it'd be super hard to play in Mountaineer Field with a piping hot stadium and a bunch of. I mean, I'm gonna tell you guys, 7:30 kick. People are gonna be tuned up, son.
Yeah,
they're gonna be tuned in.
That's why I laugh at these people from Pittsburgh who think like, well, WVU fans aren't really stoked on the state of their program, so it's just gonna. brother, we could be 0-11 if Pitt's coming to town. Pitt's coming to town. That's it. Like and again, they don't understand. I mean, and some of them do. We like to make our jokes, and it's nowhere near the passion of WVU, but Pitt obviously does have Jed, 6 or 7 really passionate fans. Like those ones get it.
6.
Those ones, 6.5 maybe. Okay. They might be raising another one as we speak. The real Pitt fans, the ones who actually follow their team in the good times and the bad, and not just when they want to be front runners when things are going well. They understand that it's going to be a hornet's nest down there Saturday night. And I do wonder too, last year Pitt lost a lot of those emotional leaders that we were kind of they're all 5 of their offensive linemen were returning guys. Izzy was a big part of that. Bartholomew, the tight end, although he's still there to be fair. But on defense, you mentioned Servakier Dennis, you mentioned Kaliza Cansey, John Morgan, another one of their defensive linemen who was a big emotional, good player, physical, emotional guy for them. I wonder what that's going to be like, because they haven't stepped into, a lot of these guys haven't stepped into an atmosphere like this on the road, right? Because we can say that about the same with a lot of guys on our team haven't stepped into an atmosphere like this quite yet, or at least as starters, right? But it's different when it's your atmosphere at home as opposed to going on the road and doing it. So I wonder how that plays out too.
To give you some sense, again, what they're going to do conceptually, and you can have answers to this. I don't want to give the impression they're a big cover zero team. They're just going to bring the house every snap and go true man with no safety. That's not necessarily the case with what he does structurally. He's more of he's a quarters-based defense. Now, I do think it serves us well that we played Penn State first. That's another even front defense that runs a lot of these fire zone blitzes, somewhat similar looks. I think the difference would be Pitt tends to have far more aggressive safeties against the run. That's under ordinary circumstances. Now, when you compound that to what I was saying earlier, the disposition that Narduzzi's most likely going to have in this game more than normal, even he was run on last week by Cincinnati. He was run on last year by us. He doesn't want that to happen. So for those listening at home or watching at home, just envision this. If you have quarters coverage, that literally means there's 4 defenders across the back end of the coverage. That's the shell of the coverage. So you got 2 corners and you got 2 safeties. Now, there's different ways you can play quarters coverage. What tends to happen is if the routes push vertical, it kind of becomes cover zero because it turns into true man. All right, but have flat players underneath, zone flat players. But what Pitt does, sometimes if 4 routes don't push vertical, the safeties are there to help the corner vertical. That's the idea of the coverage, because they got those 2 middle quarters. But what Pitt does instead, when their safeties become overactive, they kind of dip and nibble toward the box. So what ends up happening, a typical cover 4 corner might think, well, I got help on that skinny post in that middle quarter. Well, with Pitt, maybe not quite so much if their safety's that aggressively playing downhill, because you got to hold your own. And if that wideout goes vertical, now you got him on that skinny post, because that safety's now a box player, even if he's triggered by the snap. I mean, he might have a run fit. And normally what you'll see, Owen, you know this, if you have even active safeties in quarters coverage, a lot of it's post snap, sometimes pre-snap by alignment. You'll see Pitt doing this. You'll see the safeties kick down low, and you're like, dude, what are you doing? Man, you're really pushing the envelope with your depth. But they tend to do that more than a lot of defenses do, and that's because of Narduzzi's aggressive nature to stop the run and outnumber you. So if you think RPO, even if you don't have to go vertical, and if you want to go RPO, we talked in the last episode how we went RPO on the goal line against Duquesne. The same kind of philosophy holds true. You're going to have what we call a conflict defender, and that's who the quarterback, in this case Garrett's, going to read. So he has a conflict defender. So we might have a zone play call, and he puts the ball in the belly of CJ, and he's reading that conflict defender. Let's say it's the safety. Well, if the safety kicks downhill, now you have a route coming behind that safety to throw and fill that void. But what it takes, that receiver has to beat that corner on that route. And if you do, you got to play. If the corner or if the safety doesn't come down as aggressively, well, now you can give. And I also think this could be one of those games that, again, if we're celebrating on Sunday morning, one of the reasons is we're talking about what a great job in pass pro CJ did, what a great job in pass pro Jalen did. So that's going to have to play a role as well. They're going to have to man up and do what we've seen them do from a pass protection standpoint. And it's the kind of game, Owen, that I think over the course of the time they'll spend at West Virginia, this is the tape that scouts will come back and watch. These types of games, we have to be a complete back.
Yeah.
You're going to be productive in the downhill game, but you're also going to be asked to punch somebody in the mouth when they come running free as a defender off your key. So that's kind of what I'm looking at here. Now, if we're tall to the challenge, the plays are there to be made, but so much of it's going to be incumbent. Can the wideouts and single coverage opportunities beat that guy and make plays? And then can Garrett execute with the appropriate read and the appropriate throw? And so there's a lot of ifs, but they're trying to outnumber you and force the issue quickly. So they don't want to be patient. They don't want to let you sit back there and carve them up. They're going to force the issue. Something's going to happen fast. That something is either they're going to knock you backwards behind the sticks, or you're going to make a play downfield. Because when you think of these types of coverages, normally what I would always coach my quarterbacks and the way I viewed it, you're thinking 2 areas of the field are suspect. 2 areas of the field can be most readily attacked. Deep middle, quick flat. Deep middle, quick flat. So those are the 2 areas that you can exploit, but it takes execution and just individual Jimmies and Joes to be able to do that.
Yeah, just do your job.
Do your job, Bill Belichick. Do your job. All right, Jed,
we haven't even mentioned special teams. Number 1 in the ACC last year in punt returns. Let's hope he doesn't touch a punt return. But
yeah, let's hope not. All right, gentlemen, we're over an hour already. Final thoughts, final words, wherever you want to go to get us out of here.
I'm going to ask you, who's your John Pennington in this game? Is there a John Pennington, and if so, who's your John?
Yeah,
Pennington?
I got mine.
You guys go first.
I'm gonna say 80's coming up big again.
Say that again, Owen. You broke up there a little bit.
Said 84 is coming up big again.
Okay. All right.
I'm going 80. I'm going 87. Cole Taylor.
I'm going Trey Lathan.
Ooh, I like it.
Trey Lathan.
I like it. Listen, I don't care who it is. Somebody just make a play out there, baby.
Yes, indeed.
If you're watching here on YouTube, I've had this behind me the whole time we've been doing this podcast. But here we go, boys. That's what it's all about on Saturday night. Beat Pitt, and to close us down, I figured it'll only be apropos if we repeated what Mrs. Fleming told Jack when he was a young boy when those Pitt Panthers came to Morgantown. Son, that's Pitt. You hate Pitt now. You hate Pitt tomorrow. You hate Pitt until the day you die. And then after that, you hate Pitt for all eternity. Well said, Mama Fleming. Let's get her done, boys. I'm fired up. You guys, listen,
baby, let's do it.
This game means a lot to every WVU fan. I am not special in that regard, but when you live and breathe and work around these turtleneck wearing dorks 365 days a year like I do, this is a big one, and we're going to be fired up on Saturday night. If you're going to the game, do your part. That's all. That's all I'm asking is do your part if you're going to the game on Saturday night.
Yeah, show up, and hey,
electric.
If you guys want to see old Wesley over here and myself, because I'll be there.
Good call.
Peach Lot.
Look for the WVU Grateful Dead flag. That's where you'll find us.
We'll be there.
Passing out in the gun stickers.
Passing out in the gun stickers, maybe passing out some cold ones as well, too. You never know what you're gonna get at our rowdy tailgate in the Peach Lot. But yeah, come on by, say hello. And let's make Saturday night a memorable one of those games that like Chad Pennington, that like Tyler Bittenkurt, right? We'll be talking about this one, like Chad Johnson, right? We'll be talking about this one for years and years and years to come. So
it was 33-9-1 West against us through 1950. 33-9-1 through 1950. Since then, we have the edge in the rivalry. 2019-2. We've won more than they have since 1950 in the modern era.
Jed, before last year, right, the rivalry was renewed and Pitt's 1-0 in this new age of conference realignment and everything. The oldest Pitt fan who could claim they had a winning record against WVU in their lifetime was 77 years old.
Wow.
So let's get let's get back on track. We win Saturday night. The oldest Pitt fan alive that can claim that they have a winning record against us will be 78 years old. I can do the math on that one. You see
there you go. I like
what
it.
I did there. Great stuff, guys. This was a lot of fun, and let's get it moving in the right direction. Let's have some fun Saturday night, and let's surprise some people out there in the process as well too. So that'll do it for us for this edition of ITG. Reminder though, tomorrow we got Phil Friday. He will break down nationally some of the big games as well too, like he always does. I'm interested to hear Phil's thoughts on Florida and Tennessee, and of course he will give his thoughts on the Backyard Brawl as well too. So plenty more to bring you this week. As always, the one thing we ask of you is to be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. Thanks to our guy Skyler for putting this all together. And for Jed Drenning and Owen Schmitt, I'm Wesley Uhler. Let's beat the hell out of Pitt. You've been in the gun.